Welcome to the broadcast, my dear fruit basketeers. And for those of you who are new to the channel, because I've had several hundred new subscribers since the last broadcast, I'd just like to briefly explain why I call my viewers basketeers. This is the fruit basket because my viewers are my dear old fruits. And why do I call you my fruits? It's because my great aunt Amy used to call us all my fruits, and she would sign off all of her greetings cards. My fruits, how are you? Lots of love to my dear old fruits along these lines. And it actually comes from the rhyming slang of the Cockneys. My dear old fruit gum, my chum, you see. Fruit gum, or my fruit, is Cockney rhyming slang for my chum. That's where it evolved. This is the fruit basket. And then Fly on the Wall, one of our viewers, coined the expression basketeers, which was the most perfect expression, the most perfect word to encapsulate all of my admirers. So welcome to the fruit basket. And I hope you have a really fun time. Now, I would like to ask you, do you recognize this lady, this rather elegant lady? Not me, not that one on the left, that's me of course, but on the right there, do you recognize that face? I'm sure some of you do. There's no need to write it in the comments. I don't need hundreds of people giving the same answer because I'll tell you exactly who it is. It is Hollywood legend, Hayley Mills. Hayley Mills, remember Hayley Mills? From the 60s, from the early 60s, yes. I was invited to go and watch her in conversation with Christopher Biggins, which was such fun. I had a seat in the front row as well, and was able to ask her a question, as was Zandra Rhodes, who was sitting behind me. Actually, she was in colours rather like today, purples and pinks, looking very fabulous indeed. She was right behind me, as was Chris Jarvis, who also asked a question, a BBC presenter. And she was in conversation. This was in Woking, and I know I've got a few basketeers in Woking. I'd never been there before, and I hadn't heard fabulous things about it, to be honest with you, but it actually was rather a nice area at the Rhoda McGaw Theatre that I went to, and enjoyed this conversation about her life and times. And it was just fun because we got to go in with a bottle of wine, which always helps, and sip the wine throughout. So I was drunk by the end, by the time it came for me to ask a question. Oh, and Maxwell Caulfield got to pop up actually via a screen because he's married to Hayley Mills' sister Juliet. And there's a large age gap between them as well, which they're famous for. He's in his 60s now. Do you remember him from Grease too? He's in his 60s. I think Juliet is in her 80s, so they always cause a bit of a stir for the age gap. But they're a very loving couple, wonderful. Always loved a bit of Maxwell Caulfield. Wasn't he in the Colbys? And when I got to ask her a question, I asked Hayley, because I wanted to spice things up a bit. I said, Hayley, dear, you look gorgeous. Could you please tell us who the most sexy or charismatic person you ever met in your Hollywood days was, and who the most ghastly and beastly was? And Mr. Biggins gave a bit of a chuckle at that. He enjoyed the question. But I have to say, Hayley Mills, as lovely as she is, she was a little bit too pure to be pink, and she would not be forthcoming and dish the dirt on who was beastly and ghastly. She said, oh, everyone was lovely, everyone was very nice indeed, which I didn't believe a word of, but she was being professional, I suppose. And but she went on to tell us who she'd had crushes on back in the day. But it was a fun evening, rather makeshift, but that added to the charm of it all. And she's 79 years old. She's in the winter of life. And I've got to tell you, she is more beautiful than she has ever looked. Now, just between you and I don't actually rate her movies. Not that I've seen many of them. I think I remember seeing Parent Trap and a few scenes of Pollyanna. But not really my bag, darling. She also had a huge hit in the United States with Let's Get Together. And in fact, in her time, in the early 60s, she was one of the biggest stars in America, as well as the rest of the world. Absolutely huge via Disney. She came to the public consciousness in the 60s with Tiger Bay, and then was discovered by Walt Disney. Hayley's father, Sir John Mills, was a very established and popular actor, named a Disney legend by the Disney company themselves. Hayley went on to follow in that tradition, making lots of Disney movies, this sort of thing. Never my cup of tea, I won't lie, but just one of those faces and those presences and a familiarity and an affection for that face and that wonderful sort of Julie Andrews-esque persona that she has. She carried herself beautifully. I got to tell you, looked fantastic in her prime at 79. Better looking than she's ever looked. Absolutely gorgeous. It was fun. Now, a little warning here for the squeamish. We are going to be talking about lavatorial issues for the next few minutes, which is an unsavoury topic, but it's come up in conversation, and this is an unsavoury channel. So if you don't like it, what are you doing here? But you know, I'm giving you fair warning. We're going to be talking about toileting, because I mentioned in the last broadcast that my information was that when Harry rocked up for a meeting with the king, he went to the little boy's room on arrival and departure. I was informed that he used the facilities, presumably for calls of nature, but this ignited a flurry of questions from you regarding what went on in that little boy's room at those two junctures, and some have suggested alternative possibilities that preclude bodily functions, you understand. So I'm not going to indulge such aspersions, but it is fun to consider your suggestions, such as tweaking the microphone, planting a bug, powdering of the snout, should we put it that way? Marching powders, you know, speaking with Meghan on the phone before he went in. You know, it's fun to consider these sort of things. But one basketeer even suggested that he was tugging the todger in there. I sincerely hope not, you know, pulling the princely pecker. We really hope that he wasn't doing in that. But I'm quite sure, actually, that he was simply desperate for a slash when he arrived, and then after meeting his father and drinking all that coffee, because as I revealed, he didn't drink tea, he drank coffee at that meeting. Well, presumably he went off to have a quick post-coffee shit. I mean, that's the most likely explanation, isn't it, my dear? What is it? They're called diuretics and laxatives, all this sort of jazz. Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because one aspect of royal working life that's rarely considered is how their majesties and their royal highnesses manage the release of these fluids and the evacuation of the bowels on a very busy day when they're away from home. How do they do it? Where do they go? How do they take a leak? Do they wear diapers? How do they cope? Well, what I'll tell you is that I've encountered many a former lady-in-waiting in my time, some serving at the moment when I spoke to them. At least two of the Queen's companions, Queen Camilla's, watched this very broadcast. So what I can tell you is that plans for such lavatorial moments are factored into a day's planning. Isn't it curious? They must be factored in for practical reasons, but that's not to say that there isn't plenty of ad hoc moments along the way which arise depending on the royal and the era we're talking about and the circumstance. So there is wiggle room, if you'll pardon the thought. You might remember that Lady Glenconner recounted in her memoirs Princess Margaret Rose having to nip into various lavatories along the way, popping in and out of the loo. By the way, we don't call it toilet in our world. In the kingdom, toilet is a vulgarism, and it's non-you, read Nancy Mitford. It's the loo or the lavatory, and certainly not the restroom or the bathroom, which is perfectly fine in America, but not for the kingdom. So, you know, I happen to be camp, you might have noticed. Some people take me oh so seriously, but I'm rather high camp in all situations. So for me, it's the powder room. I mean, even if I'm walking into some far-flung crack den in the middle of nowhere, some shack, I will ask for the powder room, whatever I'm doing in there, whether I'm powdering my nose or anything else at all. But that's what I find to be right for me. Yeah. Or I will say, use the expression going to pay a penny, which is something I picked up from my older relatives, which is really charming here in the kingdom, because there was a time when the first public lavatories opened here in the 1800s, when one would actually have to put in a coin and pay a penny to go and do one's business or check oneself. In the public conveniences, pay a penny. You go and spend a penny, pay a penny. Isn't it charming? I think it's wonderful. You powder your nose, you pay a penny. You don't go off and just ask to take a great big dump somewhere, because that's in for dick, especially if you're a queen. Do you understand? It is not the done thing for kings and dukes and princes to wander around with their willy hanging out in public, no matter how proud they might be of such membership. Do you understand? It's not the right thing. Neither is it for princesses and duchesses and queens to furnish all and sundry with the sound of the babbling brook and the water streams, the Niagara Falls that emerge from the Lady Gardens of royalty. It's really not done. I will say there are exceptions relating to class. When royalty are among their own aristocracy, a certain set, a certain part of society, then there is less fuss made about sharing facilities, at a grand ball or some sort of event. But day to day, when it comes to royal planning, it's discreetly referred to as the royal retiring room when scheduling takes place, this sort of thing. Retiring rooms, and they are usually discreetly cordoned off for the right moments. In the late Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip's day, there may have been exceptions made in the odd moment, especially when they were mixing with their own echelons of society, but you would never find the late Queen copping a squat and shaking her lettuce in a neighbouring stall at the local village hall for the vegetable show. That would bring a whole new meaning to taking a leak. So do you see, do you understand why when you witness royalty at soirees and events they barely take a sip of anything aside from the possibility of poisoning? The glass barely touches the lips after a toast, if at all. It's not only for reasons of hygiene and safety, it's also because they don't want to work on a full bladder, and in fact they are trained from infancy through their lifestyle not to pander to their bladder, and it can be done. I didn't use the powder room through my school days at all throughout the entire day. I remember the first time I walked into one when I was 4 years old, and I sniffed the air, and it was perfectly clean loo, but in an old Victorian building, and you could just smell the odours of the lavatory, the bleachers, urine. I won't progress along that line. You get my drift, my dear, but that was the first and last time I walked in there. And no, I'm not peeing on your leg and telling you it's raining. That actually happened. I did not use any of those stalls the entire school career for any reason whatsoever. Disgusting. So it can be done. Do not pander to your bladder. Keep the musculature strong in that apparatus. Do you understand? Of course, the royals benefit, if they allow themselves to, from a diet that is balanced, of good quality, and it encourages a regular bowel movement in the morning. And, but when it comes to Harry, he's glugging back buckets of coffee all day long, isn't he? Rocking up at the Starbucks, glug, 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 coffee down, not in sips, but great big gulps. And so you end up with all kinds of misadventures going on. However, the royals are only human. So, I'm being a little bit naughty here and telling tales out of school, but I have been told on great authority, that it is actually not unusual for members of the royal family, get this, and this is not one word of a lie, it is not unusual for royalty to pee in a bottle, particularly when en route to events in the car. Yes, that is not unknown or rare in royal circles. In a bush, and yes, I am talking the likes of the late Prince Philip, King Charles, Prince William, definitely Harry, et al. All of them, dear, even Zara Phillips. Yes, remember Harry's trips to the Vine Tree pub, for example. The pub that he frequented, which was one of many establishments he knew of intimately. One would find him staggering around the various urinals in various states that you can imagine, sprinkling his imbibements all over the place. This pub I mention is the place where he mounted, in his own words. Yes, a prince of this kingdom, the king's son, told us that he mounted lucky old Sasha Walpole in the field behind the pub. So all kinds of emissions go on there. That's where he lost his virginity, isn't it? And William himself, I'm afraid, our future king, has been photographed watering the plants in a field. So even if you doubt what I'm saying, the evidence is out there, but I guess he forgot his bottle that day because he was outside. And sometimes the organisers of royal events go to very unnecessary lengths. In the 1960s, for example, the late Queen Elizabeth visited the RAF at St Morgan to present squadron colours, and the toilets were inspected and they were assessed to be inferior, not up to scratch. So a brand new block was built at great expense that cost as much as a small house in the kingdom. But the Queen had a very light lunch, barely a sip of anything, and never went on to pay a penny at all and use this block. So that was a great waste. This gown is obviously too small for me. A little charity shop affair that I picked up. I think it's a little girl's fancy dress. So excuse it looking rather tight around the shoulders, but it's getting hot, so I had to remove my blazer. I'm sure you'll indulge me. Let's move on to Prince Harry, because, as you might recall, President Trump told us that he would end the Russia-Ukraine war on the first day of his presidency. Didn't he, my dear? Do you remember that promise? The first day. So, by my watch, he's about 235 days overdue. We're still waiting, President Trump, but fear not, my dears, because the King's special envoy is Viceroy, the true King, the super King of Benson and Hedges. Todger-in-Chief, Prince Harry, His Royal Lowness, has returned to Ukraine for the second time in 6 months, it seems. They can't do without him. They've been begging for his return to help stop the war. Oh, no fanfare. No publicity for the famed Shy Fauntleroy. Oh, whoopsie. There's a few cameras muscling their way into this leg of the privacy tour. Whoops. Oh, poor Harry, been ambushed by cameras. He never would have planned and plotted that, would he? Because he relishes his privacy. He claims that he was urged to return by the founder of the rehab clinic that he visited back in April. He said, I had to check with my wife and the British government to make sure it was okay. Then the official invitation came. Oh, someone get Barbara Broccoli on the phone. Is she casting for Bond at the moment? Here we have him, the new 007. Move over, Aaron Taylor Johnson. We have a new Bond in town right before the casting. This is all part and parcel of Harry's strategy, along with Mains and Maguire and the likes of those scoundrels, to rehabilitate his image, to oil his way back into the world's affection. This is their aim. He's mined the depths of vulgarity. The wife is a glorified Avon lady at this moment, and the only thing that will line his pockets is going to be another book, which he knows all too well. And another book will come, mark my words, whether it's in 10 months or 10 years. Mark my words, it'll come, and the wife's. Oh yes, they are on the way, but William is yet to ascend the throne. We don't know when he will. And when he does ascend the throne, he will cast his brother out and cut him off once and for all. Most likely so. The tomes, as far as Harry and Meghan are concerned, can wait. They can wait for the opportune moment. But the royal association that Harry craves must adhere to Harry at all costs, otherwise his brand is irrevocably damaged. It's their currency, isn't it? It is their currency, so Harry continues to insert himself in world affairs and maraud the globe, parading his arrogance and todgering for all to see. How dare he behave as if he is a statesman? He is not a global statesman. He is a twat. He was a spare, he was a second, and there's no shame in that. But that was actually before William's 3 issue. He was a J.D. Vance. He was a Kamala Harris. He was a Margaret Rose, an Anne. Certainly no shame in any of that. He was a David Lammy. He was a number 2, but he can't seem to accept that. These are all respectable ranks, you understand, but woe betide any second that races to try and trump the first, which is what Harry is trying to do with William and the King. It's not done. It's vulgar, and it's déclassé. So stop it. Now, a word of warning that's worth mentioning. I think we all need to be very wary about press coverage in general, because nothing sells better than royal drama. We all dine out on it in some way or the other. However, when reading rags and tabloids with conflicting stories that you're seeing at the moment, on one hand praising the Waleses as they get continual praise, then with the other hand, oh, they're boring, the Waleses are boring, the Prince and Princess of Wales are boring, which I'm not saying doesn't have any merit about it, by the way. I'm not saying I entirely disagree at this moment in time. And then other stories saying that the king is becoming irritated with William, as if they have any particular insight into the situation. Well, the truth is that there isn't much drama in the royal camp, excluding the Sussexes at this moment in time, so the press are cooking it up. And it's not actually unusual, especially for this time of year in the wake of August, when everyone's been asleep. The press get up to all kinds of mischief and cook things up, so don't take what you read or hear as gospel, even my impeccable sources. This is why I ask you to take everything that I say with a pinch of salt as well. I can only offer you my best, but there's one truth, another truth, and then inside that there is what really happened, isn't there? So we all need to be aware of that. Every commentator, every journalist, every YouTuber, every author, every TikToker has an agenda and a bias. Yes, they do. So it's worth reminding people from time to time. And many of those have an editor with an agenda to report to as well. So all that to say that I can't say if Dickie Eden's source is reliable, by the way, but Dickie Eden has been coming forth. And what I can tell you is that Dickie Eden has disclosed a conversation with one of Harry's chums, with revelations that are based on the chum's discussion with Harry this week during his trip to the kingdom, his father's kingdom and his brother's kingdom to be. Yes, this was based on a conversation this week with one of Harry's chums. And this friend told Richard Eden, "I can tell you that Harry wants to educate the children here in the UK. Harry feels his children are missing out on the extensive family network that their niece and nephews are enjoying. Harry wants his children to have the very best education. He has retained his closest friendship group of confidants from his days at school at Ludgrove and Eton. He wants that for his own children. There is still some negotiation for Harry to have with Meghan. The king, however, is delighted." Well, it's going to be very interesting to see how this story progresses, isn't it, my dears? What I can tell you is that the culture shock would be quite something for the Litlands if they were to be uprooted and plonked into British society, especially around the public schools. For those abroad, you have to understand we call our private highfalutin schools here public schools. That's the name for them. There's always some confusion. But public schools, to be honest, aren't all they were a few years ago in ideology. For example, Eton itself have bent the knee in some ways to wokery in recent years, emanating from the valleys of Silicon. So perhaps indeed their family could fit right on in there. Who knows what's going on these days, but there aren't there aren't actually that many remaining with an English accent in some of these institutions, so it won't be a problem for them to have an accent of the Americas. I'd suggest Bedales might be more up their street, which is a really fabulous school, actually. I've got friends with children there at the moment. Bedales, beloved of the Lady Sarah Chatto, that's where Princess Margaret Rose sent her. It's close to Petersfield in Hampshire, and that might be a little bit more up their street and get more creative. But another story's been doing the rounds this week from the lips of Paul Burrell, and I'm not going to dwell much on Paul Burrell's book or his character. I believe this is the third book about the life of Diana or royalty that he's merching. And I will say about Paul Burrell, I would imagine that he can be enormous fun. I've never met the bloke, but I can imagine that he would be enormous fun in small doses. And I don't have anything personally against him, I suppose, but I don't trust his stories. I never have. And it might even be due to a bent in his own nature that he doesn't always quite realise how his own lens and filter might warp certain stories, and this is a case in point. And I might be doing him a great disservice there. I could be entirely wrong, but that's my instinct, and my information is that he is a sensationalist of sorts. But it does stick in the craw when I hear all these stories of him overstepping the mark, how he gave various items of clothing after Diana died away to various people, the likes of Hajnat Khan, this sort of thing, who I did meet some years ago. The most ordinary man you could ever wish to meet, by all accounts, a very, very lovely man, but the most ordinary, both in looks and feel. Perfectly polite, though, and manners go a long way with me. But I did meet him. But it is not his place as a servant to behave in many of the ways that he behaves, and to milk that cow. But much of everything that goes on must be placed on the shoulders of Diana as far as blame goes for this, because she had poor judgment and overstepped the boundaries that she should know as the daughter of a grand aristocrat and a grand aristocratic family, growing up as she did. As one, and as a lady, she should know the limits of those sort of relationships. You can still have loving relationships with your servants while remembering the fact that they are, in fact, your servants. But Paul Burrell has revealed that he was invited to Kensington Palace just a few years ago, really. Well, where are we at? 8 years ago, before the big fallouts, 2017, by William and Harry. He was invited there, according to him. It's not really the kind of thing you can get away with lying about in a memoir. And he says that it was to help them fill in gaps in their memories of their mother, particularly during the times when they were away at boarding school. It was all a bit of a blur. And apparently William said to Paul, they didn't scrape up all the trials, literal trials and tribulations of years past, but William said, I wish you could have run things through us and done things differently, which was always my intimation and my instinct that actually Paul Burrell could have gone on to have a very successful life without being quite so vulgar. Yes, and Paul replied to William saying that, well, he had been unable to reach them and that they were very much encapsulated and sequestered in Charles's world and their father's world, so he didn't have the contact, he wasn't able to get through. Perhaps there is some truth in this. William said, Mummy drew you too close to her, Paul. We won't do that with our household. So it seems that William wants to learn from the lessons of the past. And then Paul Burrell says that William and Harry wanted to know where Paul thought things had begun to go awry in the relationship between Charles and Diana. Where did things go wrong? And this is interesting, could explain a great deal about Harry's psychology, but Paul told them that it dated from the moment of Harry's birth in September 1984. I mean, we all know that that's when things got very dark and murky, but let's not pretend that things were hunky-dory before the birth and that second pregnancy either. And Mr. Burrell told William and Harry that when Diana was recounting Charles's reaction to Harry's birth, he was peering down at this newborn baby, and he said, "Oh, red hair." That was apparently what he first said, which I'm going to interject and say, isn't that perfectly and entirely natural? If the baby came out with jet black hair, I'm sure that would be the first thing that anyone would say. When it comes to skin tone, hair, physical features, one limb missing, anything at all, you comment on it, don't you, to the other parent? So we're told he said, "Oh, red hair," but maybe it was, "Oh, red hair." Again, lovely. Apparently Diana then reminded him of the Spencer gene. Well, I don't believe that, because Charles wouldn't need reminding. He dated Diana's sister, and they all have hues and hints of ginger in it, especially in the places that aren't visible. Yes, so he didn't need that reminder. Anyway, then he says, and he told William and Harry, which is unbelievable to me, that Charles told Diana, "Well, at least I have got my heir and spare, and I can return to Camilla." How did Harry receive this news? Poker-faced, Paul Burrell tells us. Paul says, "I was in floods of tears." Crocodile tears, Paul, as we saw in the jungle. I'm a celebrity. Floods of tears, but Harry never flinched. "I remember this moment distinctly because it looked like he was bearing his mother's pain. Harry, it's the truth. I wouldn't tell you that unless it was exactly what your mother told me, and I think you know that now." And Paul claims that subsequently he's been so hurt by Harry's more recent words about him that he says he has no option, no choice but to disclose the details of this meeting, which was supposed to be kept private. Well, I find it an utterly preposterous notion that Charles would say such a thing, particularly in such a style and on such an occasion. Now, if you're talking about through Diana's filter, that's where I can give Paul Burrell the benefit of the doubt, because although Diana is not alive to refute these allegations, by the way, is she? But Diana did have that histrionic bent that is mirrored in Meghan. You know, as much as we adore Diana, and most of us love the girl, and, you know, what an icon, what a fabulous woman, but she did have that histrionic bent that made life difficult for very many people all around her, falling out with people all over the place. That was usual for her. And it was also usual for her to be very off the cuff, with a sort of sense of the casual melodrama. You see it in her Panorama interview and others, you know, just very casually and off the cuff. She would just throw in these little tooth bombs, just oh so casually. So I can, in Paul's defence, I can ostensibly imagine her coming out with something like that, and quoting Charles in that manner, you say, saying, oh yes, he told me, you know, I've got the heir and the spare and I can return to Camilla. But do I actually think that Prince Charles, as he was, actually uttered those words in that style and manner? No, I do not. In fact, I don't believe it for a moment. I don't. Well, if what Paul Burrell is telling us is true about this conversation with William and Harry, then one can understand how it might fuck Harry up in all kinds of ways. One can sort of understand it, but by the same token, it actually tells me more about Mr. Burrell and the late Diana than it does about King Charles. The Princess Royal has been in Northern Ireland, where she joined a garden party at Hillsborough Castle to meet extraordinary people invited in recognition of their public service, and presented a 106-year-old veteran by the name of Norman Irwin with a BEM, the British Empire Medal, for voluntary work in his hometown. Mr. Irwin joined up at the outbreak of World War II, serving throughout the war, and he was the last living member of the Corps of Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers. The princess wore muted blues and an array of feathers with gloves and sensible shoes. And there's Princess Beatrice. She was taking part in a fundraiser to honour those who lost their lives on 9/11. Her Royal Highness joined stars of sport and screen to man the phone lines on the trading floor at BGC in their Canary Wharf office. She wore black Ralph Lauren, Zara heels, and a double-faced Georgette shirt dress, and she helped to raise millions. And there's all kinds of excitement in the air for next week's state visit from America, where the royal household is preparing to welcome the President and Mrs. Trump. The Royal Muse plays a crucial role, transporting the visiting head of state in style to the quadrangle of Windsor Castle. Let's hope for a bit of decent weather next week. It's been a mix of very sunny weather here, bright weather, along with stormy and drizzly and overcast at times. It's all sorts, a bit of rain as well, and I'm in absolute heaven. Wonderful. I just adore September and October. I love trotting about the villagey neighbourhoods in my vicinity in this season, and some of the parks, you know. So many people here love the summer and wish for the summer and crave for the summer. I don't, and I tend to hide away and hibernate. But I would certainly never dismiss any season, including the summer, because their impermanence, the impermanence of the seasons in this glorious green and pleasant land, makes me relish the times of year like this that I do love the best. Thanks for your company, Basketeers. I look forward to seeing you next time here in the Fruit Basket on the River Broadcast. If you enjoyed the show, consider treating me to an autumn dram. My tip jar is in the box, or you can simply leave me a fruity comment or a juicy thought. Most welcome. Ta-ra and toodle pip.